Good morning, everybody. So I am making this video and I have no idea if anyone will even watch it, but for me this is just a chance to kind of think over and put everything together that God's been teaching me over the last couple of months, and something that I can kind of look back on my news feed and kind of remember, and it would just have been way too long of a status update. So if anyone watches, that's a bonus, but this is really just, I spent this morning trying to take a minute while the kids watch their shows to think over what God's been teaching me. I have a girlfriend coming over tomorrow, and we're going to be talking about what God's doing in her life, and just trying to speak life into her and encourage her on her journey. And I just thought it'd be so appropriate to first think about the journey that God's been taking me on. So I am sitting here today, and I just was like, maybe it'd be appropriate to share with Facebook. So I came across a verse a couple of weeks ago. It's actually smack dab in the middle of the Ten Commandments, so I know I've read it before, but it just never ever struck me before today. It's Exodus 20, verses 2 through 6, and I found it because I was doing a word search on the jealousy of God. I knew the Bible talked about how God is a jealous God, and I was really playing around with the fact that, what does that mean? What does that mean for me? What does that look like? And so Exodus 20 verses 2 through 6 says, I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. You shall not make for yourself an idol, or any likeness of what is in heaven above, or on the earth below, or in the waters under the earth. You shall not worship them or serve them. For I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children, on the third and fourth generations of those who hate me, but showing loving kindness to thousands for those who love me and keep my commandments. It just, again, I've read it before, but it just kind of really struck home for me. I shared that at the beginning of 2017, I felt like God was stripping things away and really preparing me for really what he was calling me to and what he wanted my life to be about. So I started sitting with the fact that there were so many things in my life that I put before God, that I kept control over. And through a series of different events and reading different books, it became really, really clear that God was not first. And I have a jealous God who wants to be the only thing that matters, the top priority, period. And I wasn't fooling him. He knew exactly what was important in my life, and he knew the hierarchy. And it was very obvious with what I was spending my time on and what I was spending just day to day. It was obvious what was important in my life and what was a priority and what wasn't. And it became really, really painfully obvious to me that I serve a jealous God who wants to be the end all be all, and he was not. He was not in that role in my life. And I was actually reading Francis Chan's book called You and Me Forever. Highly recommend it. It's their marriage book. Him and his wife wrote it together. Serious man of God. And he was talking about and drawing this diagram of like how your life should look. And essentially it was like, I think we usually try to like put God at the top, and then it's like immediately followed by like kids and husband and family and then job. And then like we kind of just like set up this hierarchy. He's like, that's really not accurate. He's like, it's supposed to be God, and then like this massive space, and then it's supposed to be like everything else. And I really became convicted. I realized that my husband and especially my kids were definitely top priority in my life, and something that I was trying to maintain control of. A lot of my mothering was dictated by guilt or pressures, and me just kind of taking control of that and trying to do it as best as I could, instead of releasing that to God and realizing that God is a better father and much more trustworthy with my kids' lives than I could be. And I had to sit with the fact that I had to have a serious prayer about giving my kids over to him, and that no matter what I do, I can't control what happens to them. I can't keep them safe from everything. I can't ensure that they're going to fall in love with God or encounter him for themselves. And I had to recognize my own powerlessness in that, and that God needed to control over my kids. And for a mom, that was like really, really horrifying. And I was like, this can't be it. Like, God, like, you want me to be a good mom and you want me to care about this. And I had to sit with the fact that there are multiple instances in the Bible where it is very clear that God has to come before your kids. I had to sit with Abraham, and that God asked him to put Isaac on the altar. If there was one parent in the whole span of history that had any reason to put their kid above God, it was Abraham, because Isaac was this long foretold promise of blessing, and it was like this physical representation of God's love for him and God's provision. And so Abraham had every right to put Isaac up on this pedestal and keep him safe because he was so important. And yet God asked him to sacrifice Isaac because God is a jealous God. And he wants to know that no matter what happens, we're trusting that God has our best interests at heart. And it's not about what we want. It's not about what we think should happen. It's about what he wants and what he's asking us to do. And I had to sit with the fact that God doesn't ask us to do anything that he hasn't done himself. And he sacrificed his own son. And when I hit that moment, and it's really apropos actually being it's Easter week, I realized that my approach to mothering had to change. So anyway, this immediately starts having some super life impacts on just day-to-day life as I sit with the jealousy of God. But I've also been reading, my surrogate grandfather, and also just really like spiritual mentor in my life, suggested that I start reading this book. It's called The Secrets of the Vine, another one that I highly recommend. And it's talking about how we are called to spiritual fruitfulness, and like abundant supernatural fruitfulness by abiding in God, and that he wants to pour into us and make us incredibly fruitful, and that so many of us as Christians never reach that point. That we never encounter any sort of fruitfulness in our lives. And so he was talking about a poll that he made of the Christian community. It said, what percentage of Christians do you believe are bearing fruit? The audience repeatedly estimated that about 65% of believers are bearing no fruit at all for God. The same audience estimated that most Christians do not believe that God actually disciplines his children or when they go astray, and that the vine dresser does nothing when he sees that his branch is withering and unfruitful. The third level of this said, so naturally, because of these two observations, 3/4 of Christians don't make any connection between unaddressed sin in their lives and the painful consequences or distress that they are experiencing currently. And this is where things get a little awkward. But if I believe that God is a jealous God, and if I believe what Jesus said repeatedly in the Bible, that he will actively pursue those who are lost because he loves them and he wants all of them, and he can see into the future of what their lives could be with him. The Bible also talks about, as it does in Exodus 20, about the repercussions when we don't do that. There's a reason that God wants this for our lives, and it's because it's the absolute best. And any other organization of our lives leads to pain and suffering and all of these circumstances and consequences. And basically the author of The Vine was saying, how often do we just kind of slough off what's happening in our lives and we ignore what God is trying to tell us, and we ignore his gentle direction, and we kind of go headlong into this journey that is incredibly detrimental and painful, never ever realizing that it is consequences of our own actions. In psychology, you talk about how there are, in our humanness, and to protect our fragile human ego, we will attribute anything positive that we do with our own characteristics. You're like, yeah, that's just because I'm a really good person. But anything negative that happens, we tend to blame it on our outside environment. Well, that's not who I am. That's just because of X, Y, or Z. And we do this repeatedly. That's human nature. But I believe that we've got to lean in to the negatives in our life, and we've got to do some serious soul searching of, what is God trying to tell me? And I understand that some things, like Job, some consequences aren't, or some bad things in our life aren't a consequence. But I think a lot more of them are than we like to believe. So I'm sitting in a place where I have to go through a really, really painful process because of choices that I made when God wasn't first. And as I sit and read a lot of truth, I realize that these are consequences, and these are things that happened because of decisions that I made. Willful decisions that were totally against what God was calling me to do at the time, and totally against wise counsel of the moment. And that's humbling, but it's also really exciting to think of what life will be now that those things are gone, and now that I'm actively pursuing the right hierarchy in my life. And anyway, I just wanted to pop on here. I know this is a lot longer of a post than I was initially anticipating, but I just wanted to pop on and just kind of invite you guys to join me on this thought process of, we have a God who's incredibly jealous, and he is stating over and over and over in the Bible, he wants you, and he wants all of you. And the more that you give over to him, the more that he can pour into you and bless you. Not just you, but he promises it to thousands of generations beyond you. The presence of God is powerful and absolutely life-changing. And for me, it's honestly come down to every time just the question, the haunting question of, do you trust him? Because it's not going to make any earthly sense. What he asks you to give up, it's not going to make any practical sense by the standards of the world. It is completely countercultural. It is an absolutely supernatural process. And for me, I hit a barrier, and it's absolutely comes down to nitty-gritty. Do I trust God to handle this better than I would on my own? And do I trust God to help me make this decision instead of my own intellect or my own common sense? And I tell you what, I'm early on this journey, but as soon as I decide that, as soon as I step out in faith and decide, yeah, I trust God more than this circumstance, I do not regret it. And it's always like hindsight's 20/20, and it's like, why did I wait? Like, this is so embarrassing, because this is so much better than anything I could have ever asked for, anything I could have ever thought would happen. So, yeah, it comes down to, do you trust him? My favorite verse in the Bible is Jesus is telling the disciples, you can go, you can do this. And I don't remember if it was like, go get food, or if it was like more of a like, you can leave, you don't have to do this journey with me. But Peter, it's always Peter, turns and he looks at Jesus and he says, where else would we go? You have the words of life. And that's kind of become my mantra. So I hope you guys join me in that. I hope that this speaks to somebody other than me, but this is where God's been sitting with me during the season of Lent, and it's just so fitting. We have a jealous God who would go to any lengths, including sacrificing his own son, for us. He wants you. He wants all of you, and he's not fooled when you just give him the scraps. So comment below. I'd love to hear your feedback. if this touched anybody other than me. But I hope you all have a happy Easter, and God is good all the time.